The fall of libertarianism on YouTube. In 2008, there was a moment when it looked like libertarianism was about to break into the mainstream. Ron Paul, a 70-something congressman from Texas who'd spent decades as a fringe figure inside his own party, was raising more money in a single day than his GOP primary rivals were raising in a month. Kids who'd never donated to a political campaign in their lives were putting Ron Paul bumper stickers on their cars. The money bomb, the blimp, the C-SPAN clips getting passed around like contraband. For a few years, libertarian wasn't a punchline. It was a genuinely coherent identity, built on a few plain ideas. Stop the wars, protect civil liberties, get the government out of your wallet and your bedroom alike. That coalition doesn't really exist anymore. Not as a media force and increasingly not as a meaningful label at all. What's left of libertarian content on YouTube today is either a pipeline to something much darker or a costume, a word people still wear that no longer describes what they actually believe. This is a video about how that happened, not from the outside. No deplatforming, no coordinated takedown. It happened from the inside, because the coalition was never as stable as it looked, and once real pressure hit it, it split along the fault line that was always there. Before getting into the collapse, it's worth being precise about what was collapsing. Ron Paul era libertarianism online was a genuine ideological alliance between two groups that don't obviously belong together. People who wanted looser drug laws, open borders, and gay marriage, and people who wanted lower taxes and less regulation. The thing holding them together wasn't a deep philosophical agreement, it was a shared enemy. Both groups were furious at the same post-9/11, post-2008 bailout state. Endless war, warrantless surveillance, a financial system that got bailed out while everyone else got foreclosed on. Leave me alone is a genuinely powerful organizing principle. It's also, and this matters a lot for what comes later, a principle that doesn't tell you why you want to be left alone. And once the internet's incentive structure started rewarding whichever why got the most engagement, the coalition didn't have anything left holding it together. The clearest, most documented version of what happened next has a name, the alt-right pipeline, and it has an actual academic paper behind it. Rebecca Lewis's 2018 Data and Society report, which mapped out a real network of YouTube creators who linked to and appeared on each other's channels, gradually shifting audiences toward more extreme content, the more times an idea got repeated. Stefan Molyneux is the clearest node in that network. He came up through libertarian YouTube doing philosophy and economics content. Austrian econ, non-aggression principle, the standard stuff. Over years, he kept showing up as a guest on more mainstream libertarian and libertarian-adjacent shows, where hosts treated him as a legitimate voice in the broader liberty conversation, rather than pushing back on where his arguments were actually going, which by the end included open advocacy for scientific racism dressed up in the vocabulary of just asking questions about IQ and human biodiversity. That's the mechanism worth naming precisely, because it's not really about Molyneux as an individual. It's about a specific vulnerability in libertarian discourse. A movement built around "don't tell me what to think" has a structural weakness against people who show up saying, "I'm not telling you what to think, I'm just presenting data," even when the data is bad and the framing is doing all the ideological work. Paleo-libertarianism, the Ron Paul / Lew Rockwell adjacent wing that mixed anti-state economics with anti-immigration and culturally reactionary politics, functioned as the Trojan horse. It was libertarian enough to keep its audience, reactionary enough to make the next step down the pipeline feel like a small one. The Molyneux story gets told a lot because it's dramatic. The more common story is less dramatic and honestly more important because it explains what happened to the creators who never went anywhere near scientific racism. Take the early career of channels like Sargon of Akkad or the Rubin Report. Neither started as an alt-right pipeline in the Molyneux sense, Both started closer to classical liberal, free speech focused libertarianism, skeptical of both the authoritarian right and what they saw as an increasingly illiberal progressive left. But over time, the actual libertarian policy content, the arguments about markets, drug legalization, immigration, foreign policy, thinned out while the generic anti-left culture war content thickened, because that's what got the views. This is the boring version of the collapse, and it's the one that actually explains the bulk of what happened to libertarian YouTube, not ideological capture by extremists, but ideological erosion by algorithm. Nuanced policy arguments about NAFTA or the Fed don't retain viewers the way "here's why the other side is insane" does. So creators, often without ever consciously deciding to abandon libertarianism, let the parts of their content that made them libertarian quietly starve and kept the parts that made them anti-left media personality. The label stayed. The substance didn't survive contact with the algorithm. Libertarianism's coalition was never held together by agreement on why people wanted to be left alone, only on the fact that they did. Apply pressure, the pressure of an attention economy that rewards tribal certainty over ambiguous policy nuance. And a coalition like that doesn't hold a center. It splits along whichever fault line was always latent in it. For some creators and audiences, that meant sliding toward the "who counts as us" version of the "leave me alone" impulse, nativism, race science, the whole paleo-libertarian to alt-right route. For others, it meant just losing interest in the "leave me alone" framing altogether in favor of whichever tribe was fighting hardest online, usually MAGA-flavored populism, which offers all the tribal certainty libertarianism never could. Neither of these outcomes required a conspiracy or a deliberate radicalization campaign. Both were just what happens to a coalition built on absence, on what it's against, when the platform's engagement incentives demand that creators eventually stand for something loud enough to keep an audience. So what's left in the present tense? Mostly a word doing a costume's job. You'll still find channels calling themselves libertarian. Some of them still mean it in the old sense, genuinely arguing for drug legalization, open immigration, non-interventionism, the full package. They exist, but they're a shrinking, less watched minority next to the two directions the mass of the audience actually went: creators who kept the aesthetic, the Gadsden flag, the taxation is theft framing, while functioning as straightforward culture war content for the online right, and creators who went all the way down the pipeline into open reactionary and race politics, while still occasionally reaching for libertarian vocabulary to describe it. The tell is simple. Ask a channel that still calls itself libertarian where it stands on immigration, on foreign intervention, on drug policy, the actual substantive planks, and see how many of the answers you get back sound like 2008 Ron Paul versus how many sound like generic right-wing populism with extra steps. Go back to that blimp, that money bomb, those bumper stickers. What made the Ron Paul moment feel coherent wasn't that libertarianism had solved the tension between its two halves. It hadn't. That tension was always there. What made it feel coherent was a shared enemy big enough to paper over the tension for a few years. The war, the bailout, the surveillance state. That enemy either got smaller or got replaced by different enemies that split the coalition instead of uniting it. And once that happened, libertarianism on YouTube didn't get destroyed from outside. It just stopped having a reason to hold together and fell apart along the line that was always there, into the two directions of least resistance: reactionary radicalization on one side and generic tribal politics on the other. What's left wearing the name is mostly just that, a name.